Okay, everybody, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about some render settings, and I've got this scene set up here with a basic sphere object. I'll show you what I have here. Basic sphere and a basic torus. The material on the sphere doesn't have a color, it just has a luminance channel with a little bit of texture, and it's also got a displacement, which if you select sub-poly displacement and you make the object editable, you can apply a texture to it, and that will make it look like it has a three-dimensional bumpy surface. So that's that object. The other one is a torus, and then I just used a glass object from the preset content browser. So when we render this out, it's looking pretty good. There are a few things that I'd like to talk about to make some improvements here. First of all, with the luminance, it looks like it's glowing, although the glow does not cast anywhere throughout the scene. So we can make improvements there. And also when we look at the torus, it looks like it's slightly pixelated along certain areas. Let's talk about that first. If we look closely here, you can see there's some geometrical edges that are shown, and that along this edge as well. One way to fix that is to go up to our render settings. If you select Anti-Aliasing, the default is geometry, and that's going to make it look like that sort of subtle kind of toothy kind of pixelated sort of still. So if we change geometry to best, even if we keep it at this basic properties, it's going to make a big improvement. So let's take a look at that. We render this out now. It's going to take a little bit longer. It's got more calculations to do, but it's going to smooth those edges out. So already you can see that in our reflection we have much smoother edges because the anti-aliasing is set to best. So if you have things that are reflective, translucent, or any surfaces like water or glass or something like that, if you want it to look like that smooth kind of quality, then make sure you set your anti-aliasing to best. And you can play around with the settings a little bit to make adjustments for faster renders. Now, in order to get this luminance channel to glow, we need to go back up to the render settings as well. And here what we want to do is add an effect. In this case, we want to add Global Illumination. Now, Global Illumination will calculate how light is bouncing throughout the scene. We want to make sure we set the GI mode to still image. So you can set that there. That's the default. Primary intensity. This is going to take a bit of a long time to render with the defaults. The defaults are sampling is set to medium, the irritance cache is set to medium, and also the smoothing is set to medium. We can speed this up a little bit. And so if we go to sampling, for example, we can set this to low. Irritance cache we can also set to low. Least amount of squares is good, and smoothing we can also set that to weak, and that's just going to speed things up a little bit. Now if you check that out and you don't like it, you can always go back and adjust those settings as well. Primary intensity, I'm just going to set this to 50%, and that should do for what we need. Now when we render this out, it's going to start calculating the way that all the points of light are bouncing throughout the scene. It's going to take much longer to render, but the results are going to be much different. Already you can see that we're starting to get the glow from that spherical object. We have the green kind of bouncing throughout the scene. The scene is slightly more illuminated throughout here from the extra light that I put in. We just have a better sort of rendering amongst the set. So this becomes an interesting way to change that quality of light that's casting through. The last thing would be if we wanted to add a little bit more texture into the scene. If we wanted to emphasize a bit more of some of the surface textures, we can do that by what's called Ambient Occlusion. Now this is going to change, because I have the luminance channel, it's going to change the effect of the scene, but it'll be a good example of what it looks like. So Ambient Occlusion essentially adds a little bit more grain, a little bit more texture to the area, and makes it more like it's sitting in the scene. It gives it a little bit more physicality, if you will. In this case, I'm going to bump the accuracy down to just like 20% to make it render a little bit faster. And let's check out how this is going to look. Again, it's going to calculate the global illumination. And when you have all of these things on, when you have your anti-aliasing cranked up, when you have the global illumination on, and when you have the ambient occlusion on, it's going to slow things down a lot. What we can see here is that with the ambient occlusion, it's going to add a bit more contrast to the scene. So my glowing object doesn't look like it's glowing so much anymore, but look at all the indentations. They're filled with that little bit of green and a little bit of texture that makes it look like it's a bit more physical. Also on the ground, the floor is a little bit more textural as well. So we're getting at this sort of extra contrasted lighting accordingly. Now if I wanted to include this, I might ramp up the luminance channel. Let's just do that really quickly. I'm going to ramp this up. You can hear my computer is really working hard. So luminance channel, I'm going to bump this up to like 150%. And then I'm also going to bump this light up a little bit more. I had it down a bit, but I'm just going to bring it up a bit more so you can see the objects a little bit better. And let's see how this renders. It's gonna take a little bit longer now. But again, with that ambient occlusion, it's going to give you more texture in the scene. It's going to be a bit more contrasty. It's going to emphasize some of those subtle indentations in your mesh or in the displacement or any of those qualities that you have. Let's see if I can pause this quick. No, I can't pause it. Anyway, I'll just sit here and watch it render. Here you can see now I've got a little bit more luminance, so I've got my glow coming back, which is good. Cranked up the light a little bit in the scene, and so now my torus is casting that red light back into the object, and you know, a pretty nice render for what we have. So those are some ways that you can adjust your objects, you know, improve your scene. Remember, render settings. Anti-Aliasing, setting it to best, is good for reflections and for transparency. Global Illumination will help with if you have luminance in your scene. It also will give you a more accurate quality of light bouncing. You'll see shadows within shadows, highlights within shadows. It will just give a broader sense of the light. And Ambient Occlusion allows more physicality into the scene, a little bit more green, a little bit more texture, some subtle undershadows that help make the object stand out more.